Thank you for joining me on your last session of Unite. I'm very grateful that you're with me. Out of curiosity, how many Danish people are in the audience? Okay. Jeg vil ikke dansk, men hvis du vil lære med sine, køber are nu rødt med flø. Okay. Thank you. My name is Kevin Harper. I work for ustwo. ustwo is a digital product studio out of New York. Well, we're kind of all over the place. We're in Malmo, Sweden. We're in London, in Sydney. We have some agents in Tokyo and the West Coast. And we're best known for a game or games that come out of our games team in London, which is Monument Valley. No clicking, okay. Monument Valley and Monument Valley 2. And more recently, there is Assembly with Care, which is launched on Apple Arcade. I am out of the New York studio, and we have my team has a pretty heavy focus on the XR space, and so we deal a lot with emerging tech and any kind of new technology that we can get our hands on. But while we do client work, it is important to note that we're not like a development studio. We do build products, and we're not a marketing agency. We get very open briefs. So I guess what that means is that clients will come to us, like the big five, usually, will come to us and say, hey, we have this new hardware, we have this new technology, and we're really not sure what it is good at, or here's what we think it is good at. Could you play with it a little bit? We want to release it next year and build some game or some sort of experience around that. And so we start tinkering and do a little bit of R&D, and we partner up with the clients to try to bring those products forward. Or it might be something that comes out like 6 years from now, some hardware that doesn't currently exist, and they want to build UX or UI around it. And so we will build experiences in VR to try to mimic what that hardware would be like when it comes out. But because we do this all the time, we do a ton of brainstorming. So we have to brainstorm constantly. And we do these in workshops. And my favorite one of these workshops is when we are tasked to make a game. We have this tool that we call the Game Equation Workshop. And some of the pioneers of the Game Equation Workshop are actually sitting right here, glancing at me. That's good. That's good. And it's a really powerful tool for us to get aligned with the client and just set expectations. But on my free time, I design and build games when I can, but I also love participating in game jams. Like, game jams is, it's really great opportunity to just get inspired and be inspired by other people and just learn a lot, because you go through the whole iteration of making a product, right? You go from concept all the way through development and trying to present it to the rest of the participants. And that's just something that is very dear to me. In addition, it sometimes provides some interesting opportunities. What's happening in New York right now is this kind of new phenomenon of sponsored game jams. So companies will pay developers to come do a game jam for a weekend and build something on their platform. Bose AR did one, Verizon did one, even Chic Hydro, the shaving company, did one. And sometimes these actually, besides being really fun, especially if you have a team that you like to go to these things with, present some interesting opportunities. Like the Verizon one, then the game that we made for that, they brought that to E3 to show in their booth. The Chic Hydro one, they put it in an arcade machine that they then popped into the lobby of the Games Awards. And so it's like all these fun things that come out of game jams. But if you're here already, then I probably don't have to tell you the value of game jams. But My favorite kind of game jam is the just passion ones, right? Where you just show up and there's no company involved, and if there's sponsorship involved, they don't have anything to do with actual, they just like host the space or something. And those game jams, especially the global game jam one, is something that I try to go to as much as I can, though I haven't had much time lately. I did go in January though. Lately, when I've been going to these game jams, I've been teaming up with people who have been going for the first time. So, like if you go through an icebreaker and they look like they're on their way out after the icebreaker because they can't form a team, then I'll try to like snatch them up and see if they want to join. But I have to confess that the first time that I did that, I actually did not do that out of charity. I did that because I wanted to bring my little brother to a game jam and show him the amount of work that is involved when you're trying to make a game over a weekend. And some people take a game jam very seriously. So they think it's their big break, or they get really mad at you if things don't work out at the end. And I didn't want any of that on the team, so I just looked for people who didn't have any expectations of winning and didn't know what they were doing. And so my little brother talked to this other little kid, so they became a team, and then the mom joined, and then there was some lady who was like, I can't do anything, but I want to be on a team, and we're like, come on. And that was fun, and we won, right? So in New York, in New York, that is kind of a big deal for us because in New York, the Global Game Jam at this location, the Microsoft location, has like 700 participants. There's a lot of people there. And so I thought I'd go in there and like, I have all these newbies on my team, and I'm like, oh, I can just fill their heads with whatever I want, you know? Like, I can just like make them little mini-me's. But it turned out that I learned more from this experience and learned more from them than I think that they did from me. And the first game jam that I participated in was in 2009. It was also a global game jam, and I showed up as a 3D artist at the time. And I was really corny about it. Like, I came with a little booklet that had like printouts of all my 3D work, and I'd open up the little booklet and I'd be like, you want me on your team? You know, and it wasn't it wasn't really working out. But after joining ustwo, I was introduced to all these processes. And the game equation workshop, or witnessing the birth and evolution of the game equation workshop, was kind of, it was something that I just started soaking up. It is something that I wanted to introduce and use in my own space. And so when I started participating in these game jams, I would say though, the game equation workshop is very robust. So the outcome of that is something that it's like 2 days engagement with a client. We brainstorm for 2 days, go through these processes, these exercises for 2 days. And then we have like 3 days or so of us just processing that information and iterating through it and validating it and making sure that what we go back to the client with is something that we can stand behind, right? It's something that we're proud of. But when you go to a game jam that's 48 hours, you can't spend 2 days ideating and then 3 days validating. And so this exercise that I'm about to go through will get you a decent idea. It doesn't do it for you. You hopefully will get a decent idea within an hour with a team of 5. Now, this is far less robust ideas than the game equation workshop, right? They have much more holes that you can poke into it. There's a lot of things that are not worked out. It's not validated as the game equation workshop's outcomes are. But game jams are pretty forgiving, and so this is kind of a perfect fit for that. And I've over the years, I've seen a very clear pattern of my success at a game jam, or my enjoyment at a game jam, or my proudness of an outcome of a game jam when I used Vicky and when I didn't, or when I used processes that are like Vicky. I actually did one with the same team, with and without Vicky, and that was very interesting. But I would warn you that it's not the holy grail. It doesn't solve your problems for you. You still have to do the work. The real value that you want to get out of this exercise is that you don't end up in gridlock. Like, you don't end up in a position where you are just frustrated with the process and just end up settling for an idea that you're really not happy with because you're running out of time, right? The perfect scenario that you want to find yourself is that you came up with so many good ideas that you're not sure which one you want to pick first, you know? So, without further ado, let's get to the meat of the argument, which is VICKY, 1-hour brainstorming technique designed for game jams, based off the Game Equation Workshop. And VICKY stands for Values, Interests, Crazy Eights, Keepers, Yes and. And these points represent the individual steps that you take throughout this session or throughout the brainstorming session. But you have to make sure that you do these steps in that order, right? They kind of prime each other. All these individual steps will feed into the next one, and that's very important. So the first one is values, and I'm just going to read the instruction for you because it's very small text. But and pardon me if there are any misspellings. I do this all the time. So as a team, you decide what the values are and you write them down. Sounds very simple. But basically, what you'll use this as is when you actually have game ideas, when you actually have concepts generated, you can match them back to the values. You can use the values to evaluate the individual ideas, and then you can rate them and see which ones are actually true to what you were trying to make in the first place. So, for instance, if you had a value of multiplayer, and you had now Super Mario and Smash Brothers, well, Super Mario is Smash Brothers, but you know what I mean, then Super Mario Smash Brothers would rate much higher on multiplayer than classic Super Mario, right? That's clear. But it could also represent ways of working. So for instance, if you said, one of our values this weekend is that we don't kill ourselves and have all this crazy amount of work to do just to get something working, but we want to get an MVP very early on and then just polish for the rest of the engagement, then your value might be achievable as one of the values. And your team wants to come up with about 6 of them. So at ustwo, we call them pillars. And we have a tool that we use that we call our hexy, which basically allows us to get a visual representation of our values for whatever idea we're going through. So in this example, you can see that this also highlights where your weaknesses are, right? So if you have 2 different ideas that you're trying to match against each other, inclusive and true to the target audience, you could try to come up with some ideas to make it a little stronger in those areas, right? You don't have to draw a hexy for your game jam. You can just do it in a list and just give it points. We usually, if we have 6 values, we usually do a number from 0 to 5, and we use that. But to be able to score your ideas at the end, the values needs to be the first thing that you come up with, right? So it's the first thing that you align on. And once your team is aligned and heading in the same goal, and now you're all in the same direction, and you're doing the same thing, then you are ready for creating concepts? No. Because right now, your brain is just primed for the values. Your brain has these goals in mind, but not the creative stuff. So you got to get the juices flowing. And this process is a little different in the Game Equation Workshop, but in VICKY, it's less robust, but it's more like ad hoc, so you can do it on the fly. Basically, it's step 2, which is you list out your interests. So then take 5 minutes, you set a timer for 5 minutes, and each member of your team uses a piece of paper, lists out all their interests for a little while. Mine will be like, here's an example, ninjas, rockets, submarines, sugar, knights, like that sort of thing. And basically, you just write them down. And then you take a few minutes afterwards to discuss your interests with your group. And this will serve as a pool to draw from when you actually start ideating on your ideas. So, yeah. So now you have all these interests. You have all these. You're already. You're pumped up. You heard what your friends are into. You put these two like ninjas and pizza together, and you already see a game. You want to write things down. So you go to the next step naturally. Crazy eights. So crazy eights is also very simple, but this is kind of the meat of the meat, right? This is where the concepts actually come from. So now you're primed with all of these ideas. You then take a piece of paper, you fold it into 8 segments, or you can draw lines to make 8 segments. But then you get 10 minutes, and each member tries to fill in each of those segments with an idea for a game. And just as an example, that kind of looks like this often. You don't have to be a good artist, but I would recommend that you do draw. Because what happens is that at the end, everyone is reading through their ideas to tell the rest of the team what they came up with. And if you just have text in there, everyone interprets that idea as something else. And if you have pictures or little Pictionaries or whatever you would call these little sketches, then you're much more aligned on what that idea is, and it is easier to recall for the next step, which is important. But this will give you a lot of choices. There are 5 of you, hypothetically speaking. If you all came up with 8 ideas, that is 50 ideas that you now have, and the hour is not over, right? Those are very loose ideas, they're high-level ideas, but that's 50 ideas that you have together. If you run out of time at the end and people are still flowing, people are still going, you can add another 5 minutes, because this is the juicy part, right? So don't be too strict on it. But, like I said, which one do you pick? You just want the mayonnaise, so we get to the next step, which is keepers. So this is, at this stage, you basically, each member will get 3 votes. And they will have heard all of the ideas that the rest of the team has made. And so they get to pick 3 that they favor. Personally, I would recommend that if you only favor 2, just throw your 3rd vote away and don't double up on an idea. But some people play it differently. Yeah? So that's a very simple step. So once all the votes are accumulated, you pick the top 3, right? So you could pick more than 3 if you wanted to. But you want to be careful with this, because the next step is fairly time-consuming. And if you pick more than 3, you will spend quite a bit of time going through the next step. So even if your team is aligned on like 2, and they think, oh, these 2 are great, don't even pick a 3rd. Just stick with the 2. Which will lead us to the next step, which is yes and. Now this is interesting. This comes from improv. And the first time I ran through this, I was actually a little skeptical of this exercise. But this has become a very important exercise for me. This is an exercise where if you imagine that your idea is like here, and there might be an idea over here that actually makes the game, that makes the big difference, but there's a whole bunch of shitty ideas right here. The yes and exercise is the exercise that opens up your mind to allow all those shitty ideas to exist, so you can pick the one that you really want, right? And that has. I can give you an example. We made a game for a game jam called Blobfish Massage, right? It's very simple. It's a local competitive multiplayer game where you use an Xbox controller to massage a blobfish. And if you do the type of massage that the blobfish likes, he has instructions, give it to you. You can either do the joystick, pressing it down, or you can do the squeezing of the triggers. But the blobfish only likes a particular massage at a particular time, so you have to do the right one. And then there's a meter at the bar that will fill up, and when the blobfish is satisfied with their massage first, then you win. So it's a race against the other people, right? So in itself, that was already, we were happy with the idea, competitive massaging. But through the yes and exercise, what we then got to, and that was like at the end of the spiral of the yes and exercise, was that if the person next to you is doing better than you, and their bar is moving faster than your bar, you could reach over and massage their blobfish in ways that it didn't like. And so their bars would go down. So then the player would have to manage between trying to smack away other people's hands and massaging their blobfish and sabotaging other blobfishes. So that then made the game, right? That was the actual fun part, and that would have been completely lost if we didn't have the yes and exercise. And another important piece to note about the yes and exercise is that it has to act as a safe space for expression, right? So during this time, the exercise kind of looks like this. You see, you draw a representation of one of the ideas into the middle, and then you just say, yes, and in this case, this was 2 knights on a rocket, and so you say, yes, and the knights are facing each other. Yes, and they can loop around. Yes, and both can lose, and so on and so forth, right? There should be no. There should be no scenario under which you criticize or come out negative against an idea. It should always be yes and blah, 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 right? The person has to feel safe to spew out anything because you don't know where that nugget is. You don't know where that gold is going to come from. Yeah. So at the end of this part, you actually tend to end up so excited about a particular direction that you don't even want to do a yes and for the other ideas. But out of fairness, I would recommend that you do at least one more just to try to get an even ground on the ideas. But I have never gotten to that phase. We always do the second yes and, but we always just pick the one that we're really excited about anyway. Which is usually the first one, which is the game that had the most votes in the first place. Yeah, and basically, at that point, you have your idea, and you're kind of ready to go and ready to concept. Should you be so lucky to have multiple ideas at the end of this stage, and you're like, whoa, we don't know what to pick, and your team really can't align on what they're going for, what you can do is pull out the values, right? And then start voting the ideas. Now, during that phase, if you're trying to give a score to these ideas, try your best to have the integrity of making sure that the numbers that you are assigning to particular values are fair and not just because you're trying to do a specific idea, right? That's kind of important, but also if one idea scores higher than another, but the whole team is more excited about doing the other, screw that. Just do the one that you're excited about. It's a game jam, you want to have fun, and that's ultimately what it is about. So this game, actually, I wanted to show you guys, if I can, since I still have a little bit of time, if I can do this. Let's see. Un momento. Yeah. Oops. Yep, that's that game. That's where we took that, and I'll drag this over. So this was Knights on a Rocket. We made this. The version that you see here, we put a little bit more time in it after, but the version that you see here, we made this in 48 hours for Verizon Game Jam. So it's a very simple game. You basically just try to get the other person to run into something, right? But how the whole idea started is that we were going to have two knights on a rocket flying in the same direction. Both can control the rocket together. But then, as you can see in the yes and, if I can get back here, computer stuff. As you can see in the yes and, one of the first things was, yes and the knights are facing each other. And out of that, we are like, oh, they're enemies? You know, and that made it so much more fun. And the fact that both can lose, even though that didn't get any votes, you see those little dots there? That's us voting which ideas we actually liked out of the yes and exercise. Even though the both can lose didn't get any votes, that is actually one of our favorite features, is that if both knights get knocked off, the rocket gets a point. And the rocket has like a horse head, so it gets really happy about that. Let me do this. Yeah, pretty much I don't have my speaker notes anymore, but I think I'm done. So, yeah, thank you very much for coming to the talk. I actually have a lot of time, so we can do some questions. The microphones are in the back, so feel free to jump on them if you like.
Hi. I was wondering how you would advise to extend this process to make it into a more robust version if it wasn't for a game jam.
That's a really good question. This is based off the game equation. So the question, you heard the question. She has a microphone. This is based off the game equation workshop, which we are in the midst of doing a talk for, which will be done by Marota right here, also from ustwo. And hopefully, keep your ear to the ground, and we'll announce when that talk is available. But that will be for the whole, the big workshop.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
You told that you had one game jam with a full newbie team. And if you try to implement Wiki, how do you explain the steps to them without losing the time?
Yeah, but that's the beauty of it, right? So it's so short, and you get so many ideas that you just do it with them. And while you're doing it, you're explaining what everything means. So there's no front loading. There's no you don't just dump it on them and then let's do it. It's just, we're going to do this exercise. This is something that we do. Please follow along. Here's the first step. What do we want to get out of it? Then you start writing down your values. Let's write down 6 values. Let's try to agree to 6 values. And then once those 6 values are established, then you do the next step. So you don't really have to worry about, it's not a session like this, right? Because you're just doing it one step at a time altogether.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Yep, I think that's all. Thank you very much.